There it is. We good to go, Bonnie?
We are good to go, Mayor.
All right. Thank you very much. I call the Des Moines City Council regular meeting for Thursday, February 10th, 2022 to order. And with that, I'm going to ask Councilmember Harris to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mayor. I pledge allegiance
to the
to
flag,
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Council.
On the next page. Sorry, I didn't get it in time.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Harris. With that, let the record reflect that all 6 members of the current council are present. And do we have any correspondence?
Thank you, Mayor. We have no correspondence, but we do have the following have provided written public comment. Joan Bailey, Masonic Home. Ryan and Teresa Craven, Preservation. Janet Crawford, National Recovery Month. Barbara Gibbs Dopel, Masonic Home. Marlene Hancock, Masonic Home Renovation. Tyler Pappas, Marine View and 240th. Martin Skrivanik, Priscilla Vargas for the vacant City Council position. Holly Taylor, Preservation of the Zenith Masonic Home. Barbara Wolf, Landmark. Adam Keene, Masonic Home. Steve Edmonston, Preservation, Landmark on the Sound. Doreen Harper, Mason Home, SEPA. Susan White, Landmark Building. Aaron Mack, Tear It Down. Hannah Alhal, Jaja, Rehab, Don't Demo the Masonic Home. And Nick Dahl, Masonic Home. And Mayor, we have 2 people who have been admitted to give public comment.
Okay, thank you. Before we begin public comment, I want to take a moment to remind the public that those persons making personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks, or who become boisterous, threatening, or personally abusive while addressing the council will be muted and removed from the meeting. They will have each 3 minutes to speak. And with the first one is Barbara McMichael. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay, Barbara, you have the floor.
Good evening. I'll try not to be impertinent. I'm a Des Moines resident, 22810 Thunderbird Drive. And also, I work for SoCo Culture, which I hope all of you know. It's the, there we go, got it. We're the South King County Cultural Coalition. So all sorts of cultural organizations throughout South King County. And in my work today, I was over in Southeast King County, driving home like mad then to get here in time for the meeting, driving through cookie cutter housing development, through past strip malls, past more cookie cutter developments. And I myself live on a cul-de-sac, so but the point is South King County does not have a lot of wonderful architecture. And we in Des Moines are lucky enough to have the Des Moines Masonic Home as a really prized piece of architecture that is admired by many people, including folks at the University of Washington are interested in it. The Washington Trust for Historic Preservation has expressed interest in it. The Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation at the state level interested in it. There are a lot of people who really would love to see this property remain. And I know this is an action that you're considering tonight about getting the EIS statements on. So I just want to really implore all of you to take seriously the trust we have as a community in saving a remarkable piece of architecture that can't be easily replicated anywhere else. It's not a cookie cutter. And there are many things we could do. I know you've discussed it before. Mostly it's been private endeavors. I don't know that the public has ever been involved. But I encourage our city council not to be cowed by just a status quo. And I think you could, I can tell you that 2 of our 33rd district legislators have talked with the developer to suggest all of the grants and funding that could be available to help in rehabilitating and repurposing that wonderful building. And I want you to take that very seriously and consider doing everything you can to try to save it. Okay, so I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I will mention, Barbara, that in the new business, please stay on for that information. I think you'll find it enlightening. Who was the second person, Honey?
Mayor, the second public comment is from Jeff Mccord.
All right. Jeff Mccord, you have the floor. Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you. And I'm going to read my my statement just because I want to make sure to cover what I wanted to say. So hello, my name is Jeff Mccord, and I appreciate the opportunity to give public comment. I want to start by saying that I've admired this building for decades as I've lived in the area as a West Seattle resident. As an aside, I also used to be the executive director for the Southwest Seattle Historical Society. I feel that it's such an important historical structure that it can and should serve our whole region, not just the Des Moines area. I recognize that the owners have the desire and the possible right to develop a property to fit their programmatic needs. Fortunately, I happen to also know there is a unique solution that may allow for both historic preservation and programmatic use. Because for over the past 15 years, I've worked for a company called Mccord Brothers, which is a structural mover that not only moves smaller residential homes since 1956, but also is an industrial mover that can move massive ship loaders, such as 200 feet by 100 feet by 50 feet. The entire bridge decking of the Lionsgate Bridge in Vancouver, BC. The company's also moved a 250-ton brick mansion from the Seattle area to Bainbridge Island, and one of the two remaining original historic buildings on the University of Washington campus, a stone castle and an 1856 building on San Juan Island for the National Park Service. It might be shocking to know that the building of this size can be moved at all, but it can. My suggestion is that if the council will allow, I could arrange to give a short presentation on what is possible to do with plenty of pictures. Moving this amazing historic structure on site is not only possible, but with the help of good city planning, it can be moved to a more ideal location to allow the property on site, to allow the property to be developed to its full extent, while saving the building at the same time. I will follow up in the coming days to provide my complete contact information as the historical impact of this potential loss of this amazing building is being considered. And just speaking kind of, since I have a little bit of time left, I can say that it is really remarkable about how when a building is actually repurposed as part of a new project, it can actually be an asset for the developer as well. There are certain projects that I've helped rescue, like the Pantages Mansion on Capitol Hill, which is now the cornerstone of a affordable housing development. Mixing historic with new is very possible. So that's what I would love to see if it's possible for me to arrange to be able to kind of demonstrate how it could be done.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your time. And the contact information just forwarded to our city clerk.
Thank you, I will.
Okay. All right. I understand that we do not have a city manager's report tonight. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mayor.
Okay. With that, can I have the city clerk read the consent calendar?
Item 1, approval of vouchers. Item 2, approval of minutes. Item 3, 24th Avenue Improvement Project, Kent Des Moines Road, SR 516 to 223rd Street, 2022 to 2023 on-call general civil engineering services, consultant design task assignment 2022-01 with PARAMETRIX for CenturyLink agreement redesign. Item 4, South 239th Street outfall replacement project, permanent fence easement parcel 51194000075, and that concludes the consent calendar, Mayor.
Thank you, Tara. Councilmember Nutty.
I move to approve the consent calendar as read.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Buxton, or Deputy Mayor Buxton, my apologies. Is there anyone that wishes to remove an item on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your right hand and I will call you out. Councilmember Steinmetz, Councilmember Oxiger, Deputy Mayor Buxton, Councilmember Harris, Councilmember Nutting, and myself. Consent agenda, of course, passes 6-0. All right. We've moved to new business, and from what I understand, we're going to be swapping items 1 and 2. Is that correct? We're going to be
That's
going
correct.
with the Marina Dock present replacement information first.
Correct, yes.
Okay. With that, I believe I'm yielding the floor to Dan. Is that correct?
Yep.
Take it away, Dan.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. We've got a presentation for you this evening to bring you up to speed on where we're at with the Marina Dock Replacement Project. Next slide, please. So before I get started, I just want to give a little background as a means of kind of setting the stage for how we got here, just reminding everybody some of the work we've done over the last several years. This really started with some information and suggestions we got from some of the members of the DMMA and some of the marina tenants that were suggesting that we talk with the Wagner Group. And so we did that, and we did some preliminary reports through the Wagner Group, Mark Bunzel, looking at kind of the economics of replacing some of the docks and infrastructure at the marina. So we've been doing that over the last couple of years. During that same process, we contracted with Reed Middleton. They did a condition assessment report. We wanted to get a third-party opinion about the overall condition of each of the docks and the other infrastructure at the marina so that we could put together a prioritized replacement plan consistent with what they were recommending. So we did that. We've looked at some different funding sources. We've pulled all that information together and put together a draft marina master plan, and that's been put out on the website. We've reviewed that and taken comments on that at this point. And we've had some public outreach, and through our municipal facility committee, we've met with the DMMA and the marina tenants throughout this, as well as the Harbor Master Working Group. We've been meeting on that. And so the current phase of our marina dock replacement project, we recently contracted with Moffitt and Nickel. We put out an RFQ for design services on the marina dock replacements, and ultimately they were selected. As part of that work, they've got BST and Associates who are providing financial and economic work on the project. As part of the preliminary work in their scope of work, we wanted them to validate the information that we got from the Wagner reports. Just kind of take a third party close look at the assumptions that were made originally to make sure that that's still the right way to go, the right path. And so they've done that. And then we wanted them to put together a phasing plan and look at the financial side of dock replacements, as well as looking at some design analysis associated with the replacement of the docks, and give us some recommendations and conclusions on that. And so that's what we're going to go over tonight. And then they're preparing to move forward into final design of phase 1 and permitting and ultimately construction. Next slide, please. So as part of the early work with Moffitt Nickel and BST, we wanted them to provide some feasibility analysis, both from 3 perspectives. The first is that economic perspective, the financial perspective, and then a design perspective. So from what I mean by economics, this is kind of the work that the Wagner Group was doing early on, looking at trends in the boating industry, specific in King and Pierce County, to taking a look at some of those macroeconomic trends and making recommendations for what the future of the marina should look like. So they've done that. Then the next step was to do, based on that, based on the trends of where we think boating is headed, we wanted them to do some financial analysis. And so they've done that, assuming a 3-phase project approach. And that's information we basically told them to assume 3 phases. It could be more than that, but it certainly wouldn't be less than 3 phases, just from a cash flow and construction feasibility standpoint on our end. And so we had them look at 3 phases and look at some different layouts and design options, looking at open moorage versus a mix of open and covered slips. And what they, based on both of those 2 analysis on the economic and financial side, they put together an ideal slip mix based on the financial feasibility of that, and provided that to the design team. And then the design team had the challenge of trying to fit that slip mix from a financial feasibility into the marina basin based on a 3-phase approach to the design, and get as close to that ideal slip mix from a financial feasibility as possible. So they did that based on the layout, and also taking into consideration a number of the operational logistics within the marina basin. Next slide, please. And so for that economic analysis and the financial analysis here, there's quite a few marinas that were considered in the Puget Sound. I'm not going to read all these off, but quite a list of background for rates, as well as operational review to see what other marinas are doing. Next slide, please. So the first order of business was, what is that slip distribution and the considerations associated with that? The Des Moines Marina serves a regional market. 97% of our tenants are in King and Pierce County, and only about just over 20% of our tenants are actually Des Moines residents. So approximately 80% of our marina tenants live outside the city of Des Moines. The future layouts of the marina need to reflect the demands of the regional market. We're trying to treat the marina as a business. It is a business. Even within the city's financial system, it is treated as its own standalone business. So as we seek to make decisions about the marina moving forward, things like cost benefit analysis, those are important factors that we use in making decisions for successful operations of the marina moving forward. What you're going to see is, by the end of the 3 phases, in other words, all the docks are replaced in the 3 phases that we're looking at. We're moving the proposed slip mix from to a distribution of 30 to 50 and perhaps even up to 60-foot slips in a few areas. And that's consistent with the Wagner conclusions. It takes into account the market trends in King and Pierce County, the Des Moines market locally, as well as addressing some of the issues that we have currently with overhangs. So right now we allow some of the boats to overhang the length of the slip. It just shows that we have a demand for larger slips so that the boat would fit within the entire slip. So our design for dock replacements addresses that, so that we won't have overhangs in the future, and addresses the issues that we've been seeing with the smaller boats, mainly that there's seasonality with the smaller boats, meaning that we have vacancy problems in the smaller slip sizes during the off boating seasons. The moorage rates just simply don't cover the cost of the docks with the smaller boat, the revenue we're getting from the smaller boats. And the smaller boats, as we've seen from the Wagner reports, can be accommodated in dry stack, or they can also fit in some of the larger slips if they wanted. Next slide, please. So as you're going to see, our alternative analysis and the financial considerations, we looked at, as I said, 3 phases of construction. The consultant team looked at 2 design layouts. One is all open moorage, and the other is a mix of open and covered moorage. And then we also had 2 options that we were evaluating relative to LDOC. We wanted to know if we have enough money with phase 1, enough to put LDOC in and do MN and LDOC with phase 1, or does LDOC need to be in phase 2? So that was kind of a sensitivity analysis that they were doing as part of this work. On the financial considerations, so the design team provided cost estimates for both of the layouts with all 3 phases of construction. We evaluated a construction schedule that we thought was feasible, and then estimated the debt requirements for each of those layouts and phases. Then the consultants provided us pro forma statements for each layout option by phase, and looking at revenue forecasts and expenditures, ultimately bringing all of that information back to a net present value, where the final step, we could evaluate those alternatives and layouts based on cost benefit evaluation. Next slide, please. So on this slide, what I want to start with is the information on the left, the graph information. The light blue bars that you see in here that's our existing slip mix at the marina as it exists today. So you can see we have almost 500 slips in the 20 to 29 foot range. And then you can see that blue bar kind of decreasing as you go across the slip length. The second bar that I want you to look at is the black bar. That is what the Wagner group suggested as a slip mix. And you can see that they weren't suggesting anything in the below 30 feet. So there's a gap there in that on that far left image. The next bar is the green bar. And this is what BST, our financial consultant, currently is suggesting based on that economic and financial analysis that they did. The sweet spot where we could match the cost benefit of the dock. So they were suggesting what you see, a slip mix there in green. And they also aren't recommending anything below 30 feet. So that's why you see kind of 2 gaps over there on that far, in that bandwidth for 20 to 29 foot slips. Okay, the following 4 colors that you see, MN layouts 1A, 1B, 2A, and 2B, are what the design team kind of came up with based on the alternatives and the options within those alternatives as what the slip mix that they could deliver from a design perspective and get as close as they could to the green bar. So there's a few differences here and there, and all of that is based on the phasing schedule that we have based on a 3-phase construction, and you'll be able to see this in the next few slides here. But the idea was that the reconfiguration, there were limits to how they could do this, and it was based on the rebuild option. So the first phase, whether it's MN and LDOC, we had to account for not impacting KDOC with our operation. So we only had a certain amount of space to work with. We didn't want to impact guest moorage, and so, or other existing operations. So that was a factor that we had to take into consideration. at the end of the day, you can see that the differences between the Wagner report and recommendations, the black line, and the BST and Moffett Nickel layouts are minor. You can see that there's some, especially in the 40 to 50 and the 50 plus range, there's some differences there. But overall, you can see a shift, a significant shift from the way our marina is laid out currently to larger slips. That's almost unanimous at this point. The point that I would want to make is that, and remember throughout this presentation, is we're only moving forward right now with phase one. You're going to see a couple other phases. There's going to be time to reevaluate the slip mixes before we start with phase two, and again before we start with phase three. And that's important because we want to make sure that we're hitting what the future trends of the boating industry are as we progressively develop the marina. So that's our plan moving forward for the future phases. Next slide, please. So here is an image that kind of shows what layout one would look like. This is all open moorage for layout one. And you can see the phases shown there, phase 1, 2, and 3 of the project. The blue sketch that you can see is what would be proposed for the layout of the new docks. And so you can see how in phase 1, they're almost overlaid with the existing location of MN and L dock. In future phases, the docks will get moved around a little bit as we begin to shift in that second phase to accommodate more and more larger boats. So this is a description and kind of the layout of the alternative that we looked at for this open moorage. And again, we did look at a sensitivity analysis where L dock, what if L dock wasn't in phase 1? And we've concluded that L dock can be in phase 1. So we're just showing you this, but we did do some analysis on that as well. Next slide, please. Layout option 2 is a mix of open and covered moorage. And so it's generally the same layout that you saw in the first graphic, but you can see these green boxes that are intended to show where the portion of the docks would be covered. It's shown here approximately 30% covered slips with these docks. And that was a approximate guess early on as to what might be feasible from a financial perspective, at least for the purposes of running the financial models. So next slide, please. So just kind of a conclusion of the cost of these two layout options. Over on the left side of the screen here, you see that the top open moorage, and you can see that we intend to do phase 1, probably construction would be about 2025. Phase 2 would be 2032, and phase 3 would be 2039. And you can see the cost, the future costs of those investments. And what we've done is brought that money back into 2021 dollars late in the fall when this analysis was run. And you can see, so all 3 phases of the dock replacements for the marina basin in open moorage would be about $40 million to replace all of the docks as open moorage. Down in the bottom here, you see a mix of open and covered moorage, the same layout, but with about 30% covered moorage. You can see that the cost to do that option is about $60 million. So layout 2 with covered moorage is $20 million more than option 1. And just to note, we assumed an inflation rate of 2.7% annually. That is pretty typical, except for the last several years where it's been double and even triple that. We're assuming that some of the inflation will level out over time, but on average, we've assumed a 2.7 inflation factor on that. Next slide, please. So as we begin to think about, okay, well, what would debt service look like for those phases for layout option 1, which is open mortgage. So on the left side of the screen, you can see our existing debt, which will pay off this year. And so at the marina, we'll pay off our bonds for previous improvements, which frees up debt capacity to do this first phase of dock replacements. And so that's shown graphically there about what that debt service would look like on open mortgage. So on the left side of the screen, you see debt service for phase 1, 2, and 3 for open mortgage. And in the middle there, you see what that would look like if we had a partial mix of covered mortgage and open mortgage. And you can kind of see the magnitude of what that would look like for debt service. And think about this in total phases 1, 2, and 3. So open mortgage, option 1B, we're calling it, our annual debt service for that would be 2.7 million. And to do a partial mix of covered and open mortgage, it would be about 4 million a year. To put that into perspective, our current total revenue for the marina, including all sources, is about 4 million. It's actually just a little bit less than 4 million. So that kind of puts this into perspective on what that would look like moving forward. Next slide, please. So as we begin to kind of think about, okay, what does that mean for rates and affordability moving forward? We wanted to take a look at our current rates and what's possible moving forward. So this slide is intended to show on the far left the various sources of our mortgage revenues. So you can see that by far most people pay mortgage monthly. We do have some folks that pay annually. You can see a sliver of that. And then our 5-month prepay is a program that we've had for a while. Council, if you'll recall, you would have received a memo from City Manager Matthias and the Harbor Master, I think within the last week and a half or so, explaining that we've eliminated that 5-month prepay. So that isn't something we're going to have moving forward. But and then we do have some seasonal sources in there. In the middle on the chart here, you can kind of see price per foot per month for our open monthly is the solid blue line, and then the dotted blue line is kind of our weighted average prepay. And then on a covered mortgage is the red line, with the dotted red line is our kind of our weighted average prepay on the covered docks. The thing that I want to point out here is the financial model assumes moving forward that the discount programs that we have are eliminated. That, like we eliminated the 5-month prepay, it also assumes that we eliminate the annual program. That's something that we want to probably revisit with the team. We think there's an advantage to annual prepays. It does help us if people pay annually. There's not as much administrative burden on the staff. So we'll find the sweet spot on that. But that's just something I wanted to point out here. Next slide, please. So as we begin to look at, okay, where do we sit within the market? That's what this graphic is going to show. This is looking at our open slips only. So the green line is kind of our current rates. It excludes our discount programs, though. And you can see that increasing over the slip sizes horizontally. The red line is our weighted average with the discount, and you can see that it stops at 30 feet because we don't have any discounts for boat slips greater than 30 feet. So that discount program is for the smaller slips, which make up the majority of our slips right now. The dashed blue line is the Puget Sound, our Puget Sound competitors, and that's kind of the average of what they're charging. And the yellow line is our competitors at the 95th percentile of what's being charged. The takeaways from this slide are threefold. Our current rates are about 12% below the average. And, we've been steadily trying to increase that to be at the average, and we're still below the average of what our competitors are charging in the market. We're currently 26% below the 90th percentile, and that's important because as we move to replace docks, that shows that we have capacity to increase rates and still be competitive. If our rates were currently at or above the 90th percentile, it would be very difficult to bring in additional revenue to pay for capital improvements in the marina because we'd already be at the top end of what we could charge. And the third point is that the financial models assume just that when we rebuild docks, that we're going to be at the 90th percentile with our rates, which makes sense. It's brand new infrastructure. We can be charging more for that infrastructure. Next slide, please. This slide's same information, but for covered moorage. So you can see the red line stops at 30 feet again. And then we have this new bright red line that's shown above that yellow line. So for covered moorage, we're about 12% below the average with our competitors. So that's a concern that we have. We're 23% below the 90th percentile. And this bright red line that we have shown above the yellow dashed line is if we were to go forward with option 2, layout option 2, and do a partial mix of covered and uncovered, we would have to charge 40% above what the people are paying now, at least, just to break even in order to pay for covered moorage in that layout option. That is significant. Next slide, please. So as we begin to kind of think through this, through the Marina Basin, what we want to know is as we take these first 2 or 3 steps of replacing the docks, we want to make sure that we're not interfering or doing that in a way that is problematic with the replacement of the entire Marina Basin. And we want to make sure that we've done that from a design perspective as well as a financial perspective. And that's what this is trying to show here, that when we look at the layout options for the entire Marina Basin, you can see on the left, we have layout options 1B, which is all open moorage, and layout option 2B, which is the mix of covered and open moorage. And what we have shown is 3 different interest rates, 3%, 4%, and 5%, and then the construction cost shown there in the pink bar. And as we begin to look at a cost benefit analysis, it has to be equal to or greater than 1 to work financially. So what you can see is that we can afford to replace the marina docks with all open moorage as long as our interest rate is 3% or 4%, or anything less than 4%. If it's 5% or greater, then our cost benefit number falls below 1, and we've got a problem. This also shows that layout option 2 with a mix of open and covered moorage at 30%, none of it works under any interest scenario. We don't get, it doesn't pencil financially for that option. Next slide, please. So as we begin to kind of pull back towards phase one, okay, well, what if we just did phase 1 and 2 and we just got rid of all of phase 3? We didn't even do it. Would that work? So we looked at our finances on that scenario as well. And you can see that for layout option 1, the all open mortgage, we exceed the cost benefit number well on that. But it doesn't address phase 3 at all. And with the covered mortgage, it looks like we could do partial covered mortgage as long as our interest rate was less than 4%. But again, that would tie our hands financially for the 30 years it would take to pay off the debt on phases 1 and 2 before we could address phase 3. And our docs we don't have 30 years on those docs. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing just phase 1, that in layout option 1 and 2, it looks like it would work financially. But this is the importance of why we have to look at the financial considerations of all the phases, because otherwise this slide could be misleading and show you that, well, yeah, you could afford to do some of the covered mortgage on L and M doc. The problem with that is you've tied up all your capital for the next 30 years, and now you've got phases 2 and 3 that can't be addressed. Next slide, please. So we begin to kind of look at, to conclude the presentation, you can see that for open mortgage, it works financially under 3 and 4% interest rates. At 5%, we begin to fall below the cost benefit ratio of 1, and covered slips don't meet or break even under any interest scenario at all. Next slide, please.
Hey, Dan, excuse me.
Sorry.
Could you back up one slide, please?
I forgot something.
Yes.
One of the things, thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Got ahead of myself. What the consultants did is, in order to put this into perspective, is they came up with the total cost of doing all 3 phases of construction, replacing all of the docks, and then divided that by the number of slips in those scenarios. And they came up with this approximate cost per slip. If we did all open mortgage, and you can see that's about $77,000 per slip. And then the cost if we did layout option 2 with some of the covered mortgage at a cost of about $218,000 per slip. That is a really sizable jump, to say the least. And that's what's driving these cost benefit numbers. Next slide, please. So our findings from a financial analysis at this point, phase 1 meets all the financial requirements. For phases 1 and 2, it looks like it could work for 3 and 4%, but not 5. But when you begin to look at what does that mean when we have to replace all the infrastructure, open slips layout, the open slip layout works for 3 and 4% interest rates, but not 5. And the mixed slip layout doesn't meet any financial requirements under any interest rate option. Phase 1, layout option 1B, which is L, M, and N doc. We're moving forward with that option. It maximizes the number of slips in phase 1 versus just doing M and N doc. It meets the financial and market requirements. Phases 2 and 3 are very costly because there's a lot more infrastructure to replace, especially phase 2. And before we can even start with phase 2, there's other things that have to happen first. Namely, we need to extend the seawall, the bulkhead south from the travel lift down all the way down to the south end of the marina, and as well as extending and expanding the utilities when we do that. And additionally is the adaptive purpose building that Bunzel suggested with dry stack. That serves two purposes. One, it allows us to retain the smaller boats as part of the marina function and operations. And the second thing, it provides us an opportunity to bring in additional revenue to the marina, which would be absolutely an essential if we were going to propose to do any covered moorage in phases 2 and 3. So additional revenue from the adaptive purpose building would help pay for some of that. Other options that we could consider in the future, and we'll have to continue talking about, are any number of forms of privatization. And there's a whole list of things we could talk about later relative to that. Other allocations of revenues for marina construction. We've thought about grants, among other sources. The problem with grants is, first of all, they're very few and far between people willing to pay for dock infrastructure, but it only addresses capital. It wouldn't address the structural operating issue and risks that the council would face with the moorage rates being so significantly higher than what's out in the market. So that's a consideration of risk moving forward. Next slide. So in conclusion, covered moorage is untenable from our perspective. It would require additional capital from the city or some other source of at least 20 million. And that's in addition to the 12 million that we've already infused into the marina area to replace the bulkhead. And it would require, or likely require, marina moorage rates to be subsidized. And that's problematic from any number of perspectives. The staff and the consultants, we're moving forward at this point with the final design and permitting for L, M, and N docks on open moorage, layout option 1B. And as a reminder, we're only moving forward with phase 1. Phase 2 and 3 are in the future. Phase 2 is at least 10 years out. That's what we've assumed in our financial model. The reality is there's a lot of work we would have to do over the next 10 years to make that happen. So between now and whenever we get to that point, we still have the existing docks offering covered moorage. And before we ever started with phase 2, we reassess the market conditions and economic boating trends at that point. In other words, additional feasibility study would be needed for future phases. Next slide, please. So what comes next? We're in the process of finalizing the economic and financial reports with the consultant. And those will be used by Katie, Scott, and myself. We're going to use those as we finish up and finalize our marina master plan. And while we're doing that, the consultant team will be moving forward on design of LM and N docks. There will be some design options within that open moorage that we'll get some feedback on from the boaters and the tenants down there. We're also going to develop a construction staging plan. I know that has been brought up as a concern, so we'll address that as we move forward in design. And we'll be moving forward to continue our permitting processes. We've had preliminary conversations with some of our permitting agencies, but not all of them. That permitting will be done specific to phase 1, but they want it done in context with the entire marina. So that's another factor is why we've been looking at the replacement of all the docks as one project. As far as bidding for the construction of the docks, we're probably talking about this time next year, plus or minus. And I mentioned that because for two reasons. One, the construction timeline right now is at least a couple of years. So we're probably talking 2 to 3 years before we actually see new docks being floated into the marina. But because we want to bid the project probably about this time next year, one of the things we'll have to do is issue bonds probably late this fall. So we have the construction funding in hand before we go out to bid. And then, you know, the biggest question that I still have, and we probably won't know for some time, is what the environmental mitigation for the work will be. So that's kind of what comes next. And I think that wraps up our presentation at this point. So.
Thank you, Dan. Well,
Michael, did you have anything else?
No, I think that you guys did a great job of breaking down a very, very complex dynamic. Thank you.
thank you, Michael and Dan. I'll start with a round of questions. I'm going to start with Deputy Mayor Buxton.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Dan. That was fabulous. I mean, you went, it was very systematic and easy to understand. I really appreciate it. I just wanted 2 questions. One is just for clarity. So when we're talking about not replacing the no covered mortgage option, you did mention we're still going to have a lot of covered mortgage for at least until 2032. And it looks like even a little after that till phase 3 still has a little bit of covered mortgage until 2039, correct?
Yep. Yeah, that's correct.
All right. So it's not like in a few years, all covered mortgage is gone. That's yeah.
Yeah, it'll be phased. The construction will be phased.
Right.
Over the next 10 or 15 years. And
okay. And then you mentioned when we were talking about the interest rate and you're mentioning the 5%. So some of the structure of bonding is not that clear to me. So is whatever we borrow, is it going to be fixed rate? Is there a possibility of an adjustable rate on a portion? Or are you talking about we just don't know in the future when we get to phase 2 and have to borrow more or use more money, it could be at 5% at that time?
yeah, I think Beth Ann, I see that she's on. I don't know if she's available, but I think that when we issue bonds, it's a fixed rate so that we know what our risk is. I think that's how that works. We just provided different slices for sensitivity to make sure that, okay, well, if we had to issue bonds and it was 5%, what would that look like?
Okay.
But I think I'm pretty sure that we don't issue adjustable rate interest on our bonds.
No, we don't do adjustable interest rate, but sometimes you can graduate the cost of the interest rate may change a little bit by 1/4 to 0.5% over the life of the bonds, depending upon how long term they are. But for the most part, it's a fixed rate.
Yeah,
that's a good can point. I add to that?
That's a good point, Beth Ann. Just so you know, we've assumed, I think our financial models assume a 30-year debt,
Okay.
There's also, Deputy Mayor, great question, because currently what we're looking at, the CPI came out today at 7.5%. Interest rates are at historic lows. The Federal Reserve is going to slowly match what the market interest rate is going to be with what the established Fed funds bank lending rates are. So there will be an increase, but over time. But the other thing, and one of the safety mechanisms in municipal bonds is they usually have a call date or a refinance date. And so if at different periods, and usually I think if we do a 30-year bond, it's a 20-year term, I believe, Beth Ann, typically where you can refinance the bonds at whatever the existing interest rate at that time is. So there's some safety mechanisms in that. Although once again, interest rate movements are exceedingly difficult to predict.
You are correct, Michael.
Thank you.
So that 20-year option, that is not, that only works in our favor, not the lender's favor. In other words, if interest rates were back up to 1982, 12% or something, they couldn't come to us and say, we're going to force you to we're going to reevaluate this bond. You keep your interest rate for the entire life of the bond.
You lock it in. And the other thing about it is typically municipal bonds, the advantage comes in the tax break, not necessarily in the interest rate return.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We're going to move on to Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Wow. Yeah, I have absolutely no questions. No, I'm just thank you, Dan. Just this may seem silly after all these years. Do you happen to have a map of the individual slip sizes? I just off the top of my head, I can't, that just shows what the projected sizes are going to be for each of these slips in phase one.
Yeah, we have, I don't know if it's mapped out on a graphic, but we do have that information shown in table form. So it would show you in phase for LDOC, LM and NDOC, it would show you here's the size, the slip mix that we're proposing for those for the new docs. So
okay, so DMMA or what, they'll be able to just count, here's the number that are being proposed for each of for whatever you come up with is the recommendation.
Yep.
Again, another why do we go out for bonds before the bid process? Just out of curiosity.
Well, generally speaking, I don't like to bid a project unless I have money in hand. The one risk about that is you're issuing debt based on an estimate, cost estimate, and the bid could be more or it could be less. So the good news is, and this gets a little technical here, but when we issued debt for a project like this, we account for our costs as we going through the design and permitting, which is all eligible to be paid for by the bond debt. We're using cash that we have now to pay for this design work, and that can help us buffer against any bidding risk that we could be exposed to. But that's generally why, if we're going to issue a contract, we better have the money to pay for it.
Okay, are you assuming that there's going to be demand regardless of rate? I just get the impression that it's just so, they sound so optimistic about the boating market for the future that. The
market right now and in the foreseeable future is strong. We're assuming that will continue. I don't know that we're assuming that growth will continue in the boating market, but rates are relative to demand. If there's a lot of demand, then the rates can be high. If the demand were to drop off for whatever reason, then you're gonna have to stay competitive with the market, and that's a key point for moving forward. It's hard to capture what the risk is. The reality is, you're issuing $40 million in debt to pay for docks. You better be able to, have a financial model to recoup that over 30 years. And that's a complicated thing to kind of figure out. And so we've made some assumptions with trend, with rates, with revenues that are conservative, but they're still estimates. And, the council has to bear that in mind, that at the end of the day, the bill has to be paid.
Is there anything in this modeling for future updates? It almost strikes me as a one-off, like basically, we're going to rebuild for the next 50 years and as opposed to setting aside a certain amount every year for the next round of updates, in 2070 or what have you.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I know Scott and Katie and I, we've been talking with Beth Ann about is we want to move to a model in the marina where we treat the docks just like we would our fleet. So we assess our fleet, assuming a certain life cycle cost for our vehicles, and we set aside a little bit every month or every year for every vehicle. It's just a little bit, but over time we're setting aside so that we have the cash to make those future replacements. We need to do the same thing with the dock replacements.
Okay.
And we plan to do that.
And is there going to be any information? Well, two quick things. Basically, what the requirements of the APB in terms of generating revenue, what it's going to take to make up for the shortfall from the docks.
That is a good question. And I think that I can't answer that question tonight, but I know it's a question that needs to be answered. What we plan to do is once we finish the design work and we're working through getting and acquiring our permits, we'll move into more financial analysis and preliminary design of that adaptive purpose building. And the timing of that is perfect because we're preparing to start our negotiations on the land side development. And so that will dovetail nicely in with those discussions as we begin to look at just what is the rate of the return that we need to get out of the adaptive purpose building so that it pays for itself, pays for the operations, and provides additional capital for dock replacements and seawall extensions and all of that. So,
okay, two really quick things. If there could be an edge case that was basically like 700 feet of dry stack, right? I mean, as opposed to, because you could, it might be the case that it might not be the most aesthetic thing in the world, but it could turn out that the just a wall of dry stack could generate a lot of money.
I think that's a fair assessment that we can make as we look at alternatives for that. We can look at having the adaptive purpose building where a portion facilitates, some of the retail and the farmers market, some of the other things that we've wanted to do, but perhaps the dry stack, we could consider an option where that's exterior and it's not enclosed within a building. I think, there's pros and cons to that as well, not just aesthetics, but, there's other factors to think about, but we can look at that.
I'd like to add to that, the dry stack storage. I mean, one of the things we're going to be very careful is that the building height not obstruct any views from the condos on the hillside. That's a commitment that we have made over and over and over. So the building is going to be commensurate with aesthetics and the visual corridors that exist currently. And that's one of the dynamics in the design and usefulness of that building.
Yeah, fair enough. I just want the public to have an idea of the revenue generating capabilities of these different options, relative to square foot. Okay,
Councilmember Harris, hold on. I'm gonna take you for a second round. I want some of the other council members to have opportunity to ask questions.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to Councilmember Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dan, I kind of had a couple of questions that came up as I was looking at your slides, and the slide on the debt service amounts, were those all in current dollars or are those projected dollars? How are we comparing things to get to that number? So phase 3, particularly phase 2 and phase 3, which were significantly more.
Yeah, it's based on current dollars, net present value.
All right. And then when you were talking about getting the rates up to the 90% or 90th percentile, what are you assuming for occupancy at that point?
I'm assuming near, in the high 90s or as close to 100 as I can get.
Okay. And what's that? Is that based on the reports from the consultants? We can
No,
get that for new.
That's more from an operational standard. I think that we're assuming that at 90% will be fully leased, but you can never really be at 100%. If you're always at 100% occupancy, you're not charging enough.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, council member, if I may. We have a very long waiting list at the moment. And I think based on your question, that implies, I think what you're suggesting that something's wrong when you've got that long of a waiting list. People are like going out years. That's an indication that your rate structure is probably lower than it should be. So I think we're hoping to come closer to a competitive dynamic with the marinas that we compete with.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to get at, where is that sweet spot where we got the highest rates that we can at a decent occupancy rate? And that's why I was asking, when Dan was talking about having those rates at the 90th percentile in the area, how do we know we can get a reasonable occupancy at that?
Of course, on the other hand, having rates at 90% with new docks makes the quality of the marina more attractive, in addition the logistical piece.
Oh, I agree. It's a much nicer place to keep your boat, and people are willing to pay more for that. So
yeah, and that Councilmember, that the answer to that question is based on the economic analysis that the Wagner Group did, as well as BST, which is showing the trend and the demand for that size of slip all throughout the Puget Sound. And so that's how we're confident with that slip size will be fully leased at those rates.
Does that projection hold for 50 years? Or how long was the projection?
I can't answer that question. I mean, there's risk there, obviously. I think that we've managed that risk well with the projections, but who knows what the future is going to hold. And so that's just, there's that comfort level that you want to have to move forward with that kind of investment. And I feel comfortable with the work that economists have done in telling us what the trend is. And but there definitely is risk.
And Dan, I just want to add to that. I mean, it's a great question and it's a great answer. And the idea is that, we can't look in a crystal ball 50 years from now, but I think one of the things that protects the city to some degree is the fact that we're going to do it in phases and reevaluate kind of where we are at each segment of the way. So we get closer views of what the end game looks like as we approach that.
And then one kind of last question that may have been at least partially answered in the questions that Councilman Harris was asking is that, if I'm not mistaken, L, M, and N docks have a lot of the sailboats and some of the shorter or smaller slips. And so if those are the first ones being replaced, what is the plan to mitigate what we're losing while those docks are being replaced? To make sure that those people have a place to keep their boat.
Yeah. Actually, LM and N dock are all of our larger slips. They're the ones that are closest to guest moorage.
Okay, I have them reversed.
Yeah, so they're at the far north end of the docks, right adjacent to guest moorage. And that the second part of your question is what we'll be developing, that construction staging plan and how we maneuver boats as we're taking the old docks out and bringing in the new ones. We'll put a plan together of how we'll deal with that. That gets a little tricky. So.
And is it anticipated that, assuming that we're going to do a dry stack option that's not 700 feet tall, but doesn't obstruct any views, is that those will be built by the time some of the smaller slips are going to be taken out, so that there'll be they can easily transition from one to the other?
Yes. Yeah. So with phase one, we're not displacing any of the small boats. We're replacing LM and N dock with 40 and 50-foot slips like they are today, like they are now. So we aren't losing any of the smaller boats. We're not taking any of those slips away. It's going to be a while before we get to that second phase of the development.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Steinmetz. Moving on to Councilmember Oxiger. I think you're on mute, Gene.
There we go. Thank you. Dan, I was curious, you indicated that approximately 20% of the tenants at the marina right now are Des Moines residents. How many of those fall into the 29-foot or less boat category?
All right, where's Katie? Do you happen to have an approximate guess on that? I mean, we have the numbers we could provide, but
I don't have the percentage, but it was roughly like in the smaller slips, it was roughly, I want to say it was like 60 people, maybe 60 or less people.
Okay, so I'm concerned that we're not pricing our own residents out of our marina.
I can get that number later and give it to you.
Okay.
Is that all you had questions of?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have a few myself. First one would be the back end of Councilmember Oxiger's statement. We have to treat this like a business. If we were subsidizing our own residents, it'd be the city that would be covering the difference in the cost. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about, with the change of the LM and N docks, what our guest moorage strategy is?
Yeah, that's a great point. I forgot to mention that in my presentation, but if you recall the layout 1 and 2, neither of those options assumed a covered moorage on end dock at all. Under any of those scenarios, end dock is open moorage. And one of the things that we discovered in our master planning work, and we've talked about, is the potential to expand guest moorage in the future, especially as landside development begins to expand and there's opportunities to attract more boating into the marina. So we have those options to be able to do that with this design layout.
Okay. The waiting list, especially for bigger boats, because I think a lot of them are predominantly covered, as I understand it. Do you think the waiting list will be as fervent and aggressive as it is if we have open slips?
I hope we don't have any waiting lists in the future. If we have a waiting list, we're not charging enough. We're not recouping. It's lost revenue.
So if I was asked today, if we didn't have the covered slips, say they didn't exist in LM and N, would we be as full as we are?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the last one, I know you only got into it a little bit, and it's one of my major concerns about covered moorage, honestly. Can you tell us a little bit about the direction that the environmental groups that we have to do the permitting with and give guidance and so forth, and what their view is of how a marina should be in the future and are likely to approve in permitting?
That's a move. That seems to be a moving target, and you're hitting a sore spot with me. Sorry. It's very challenging right now to build anything on the water. I mean, Andrew, I know he's listening in. You've all familiar with what we've gone through on the North Bulkhead, And I suspect that we're going to go through the same kinds of challenges with the dock replacements. Andrew and his design team on the fishing pier down in Redondo have had to be extremely creative in coming up with a design for the replacement of that pier that could even be permitted. And it it's things like graded walkways and open walkways, and where sunlight can pass through the decking. And so that's what they're looking for us to provide. The only way we would get covered moorage, a solid screening like that, is as a mitigating factor of taking what's down there away. And this isn't just Des Moines, everybody's facing these same challenges. So we still have a lot of permitting work to do to get this done. So,
And
probably didn't answer your question.
yeah,
But
no, but I know it. We're watching it in the fishing pier, the same complications, and this would be times 10 that, I'm sure, or more, as far as complexity. The last one, if I got that correct, you guys are saying, I think the uncovered slips would cost about $77,000 to build, and I can't remember. I think it was like 258, 38, 77, something like that. I did the quick math on it. That it would cost us 238% more to build a covered moorage slip than an uncovered.
I didn't run the percentages myself.
Yeah, that's what I do for a living. So
the cost.
It was just astounding to me that was the number. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Councilmember Harris, I believe you had some other questions.
Thank you, Mayor. And getting back to the covered moorage, because I know that's going to be, I was struck by the notion that they really don't believe that it would be, it could, there would be demand at the necessary rate. This kind of harkens back to the sling launch, that it just became too expensive. People wouldn't pay it. But I just want to confirm that that's really the case.
Well, yeah, I think that to say it that way, I don't know that I would say it that way. There might be a demand, but what they're saying is they're not comfortable moving forward with it because the rates are so far above what you would see in the market. There might be demand, but you couldn't guarantee that. The risk would be very excessive to move forward in that kind of a scenario. That's what they're saying.
Okay. So regarding the environmental mitigation, I understand you can't predict the cost, but just because it's far enough out, is there any way that we could consider that credit debit system being applied to projects in Des Moines as opposed to, Everett? And
yep.
That?
I think I like that approach a lot. I know Andrew and I have talked about that, as well as with Michael, and we've talked about developing an environmental mitigation project right here. And we have opportunities to do that both at the mouth of Des Moines Creek and Massey Creek. And so we can work at developing that kind of a project within our CIP, and the mitigation we can apply within the marina itself for other improvements we have to make, as well as other environmental projects in the future. And other cities can pay into our projects like we did in mitigating the bulkhead. So we can look at that.
Okay. I'm just thinking about all the thousands of tires, just so on. Okay. So if you happen to have, hypothetically, a 36-foot sailboat on Sea Dock, can you kind of guesstimate what the rates are going to be, 5 years out? And are they going to, really be subject to substantial increases as part of this thing? Or
what do you have, a sailboat on Sea Dock?
No, not anymore, you know, but yeah.
Well, no, one of the things we want to avoid is these huge jumps in rates. So we want to try to, increase rates so that we're competitive in the market. We're trying to at least right now be at the average rate of rates, but we also don't want to increase rates so dramatically that it's an impact to voters. But as Michael said earlier, we're seeing inflation right now, 6, 7, 8% over and over. So those are going to roll up and impact the voters.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know it's a business, but it's also, it was built, it's the Des Moines Marina, and there's a sensitivity that, you just can't have people take it in the neck. I mean, there has to be a transition. Frankly, we're all getting older, most people who have like sailboats and so on, and there's got to be a way to make it smooth. Anyway, I'm sorry for being rhetorical. Is there any, is there going to be any kind of like threat to navigation if you, this may be stupid, but if you allowed for a 60-foot boat, does that, basically tax the ability to move about safely or not?
Yeah.
Well, what we, in the design layout, we were striving for 40, 50-foot slips, and there was some opportunities strategically within the design analysis that allowed for a few larger boats. So we've accommodated for that.
Motion detected in the side yard.
Okay.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
That's it. Okay. Yeah, I want to keep the meeting moving. I really appreciate the presentation, Dan. It was very informative and enlightening, and obviously gets us something to digest. With that, I'm going to move on to the next order of business.
Mayor, just one more point.
Oh, go ahead.
In anticipation of some of the comments that we're likely to get over the next coming weeks, staff intends to come back to the council in probably early March, probably March 10th, to just address some of the rumors and stories that have been passed around for a while about the financial management of the marina. So we intend to bring forward some information on that for the council March 10th.
All right. Thank you, Dan. With that, we're going to move on to the next item, which is the ESA consultant contract staff presentation. I believe, Susan, you're going to take that over. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
All right. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. Susan Cesar, the city's Chief Strategic Officer, and I also am the city SEPA official. Next slide, please. So in this presentation, I'm going to start with a little background about SEPA and the purpose and the process. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Zenith Properties LLC proposal and the city's role in the review. And then a little bit about Environmental Science Associates and the contract that you have on the agenda tonight. And then we'll have a motion for you. Next slide, please. So just for background, the State Environmental Policy Act, what is the purpose of it? SEPA is a process that serves to identify and analyze environmental impacts associated with governmental decisions. It helps agency decision makers, so the city in this case, applicants and the public understand how the proposal will affect the environment. It utilizes a systematic interdisciplinary approach and ensures that environmental amenities and values will be given consideration in our decision making. Next slide, please. So as far as how the process works, we review a proposal and the information that is submitted with it, as well as an environmental checklist, and the lead agency, which is the city, issues a determination. And we can issue either a determination of non-significance, which can also have some mitigation measures attached, or a determination of significance. We issue a determination of significance if the proposal is likely to have significant adverse environmental impacts. And what that means is that an environmental impact statement will be required. The EIS process is a tool. It's a tool for identifying and analyzing probable adverse environmental impacts, reasonable alternatives, and possible mitigation measures to reduce the environmental impacts identified. It also serves to provide for other agencies and the public to participate in this process. Next slide, please. Generally, the environmental impact statement process consists of 3 phases. Once we issue a determination of significance requiring an EIS, we would start the scoping process. And this is a process that allows the public, other agencies to comment on the EIS scope and the alternatives to be evaluated and assist in identifying issues and concerns. So this is the process that determines what will be in the draft EIS. There was, I think, some public questions about that, and they would have the opportunity to participate in determining what the ultimate scope of the EIS will be. And in this case, it will also inform the subsequent contract scope. Once that scoping process is complete, our consultant would begin drafting the EIS. And when that is issued, that contains an analysis of the environmental impacts, reasonable alternatives, and it also is another opportunity for agency and public involvement. That document would be issued with a comment period, and people can participate in reviewing that document. Once we have all the comments and the comment period is closed, we would issue a final environmental impact statement, and that is the final analysis and the tool that we would use in decision-making on the project. Next slide, please. So the Zenith proposal, I think most of you know that the Zenith Properties has applied for a demolition permit for structures located at that address on Marine View Drive South, and most of you know it formerly was known as a landmark on the Sound. The city is required to process this application and review it in accordance with our regulations. We did determine that SEPA review was required for this proposal, and we gave the application an initial review, requested additional information, primarily related to cultural resources. So at this point, the city is preparing to issue a determination of significance requiring an environmental impact statement for the project. Next slide, please. City's role in this process. The permit itself is an administrative permit. It's a demolition application. The city council's role tonight is to approve some resources for consultant services. So we have the adequate experts on board to complete the work. And just to be clear, so there was, I think, also some public confusion, perhaps. The action tonight is not a decision on the permit application. It's simply on a contract for consultant services. The city is in a regulatory role related to this application. We're going to review the proposal for code compliance and conduct an appropriate environmental review, in this case, an EIS, and manage a public involvement process. And the permit decision will not be made until completion of the EIS process. Next slide, please. The city's role in the EIS. This is also an administrative process that is prescribed by the Des Moines Municipal Code. I've put in some code sites here. Essentially, they assign the responsibility to the city staff under direction of the responsible official. And then it also talks about the cost of the EIS will be borne entirely by the applicant, and that we can contract with consultants, and the process for selecting a consultant, which we did follow, interviewing the candidate consultants and select the most qualified. And the contract that we've negotiated is on your agenda tonight. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Environmental Science Associates. This is the consultant that we have selected. ESA has been on the city's on-call roster for at least a decade. So we have worked with this firm before. They are a very experienced firm and a specialist in environmental consulting. They have in-house technical experts, and as well as will hire sub-consultants to fulfill any roles that they don't have in-house. They've been in business for 50 years and they have 21 offices. I have a little excerpt from their website here, which really just speaks to their philosophy. And they feel that they hire the best employees in their fields, and that they adhere to a rigorous process for preparing and reviewing technical documents, resulting in high quality work products. Next slide, please. So the contract itself, as I mentioned, we went through a selection process and selected ESA as the most qualified firm with relevant experience. This contract with ESA will add specialty expertise to the city staff to assure that we do a rigorous analysis. They'll help us with the public involvement plan and implementation. So having this contract in place will greatly help the ability of the public to participate in this process. The applicant will pay the costs, including for application review and the EIS process. And one important point that I want to make is that although the applicant pays the cost, the consultant contract is between the city and the consultant, and they will work at the direction of the city and not the applicant. The sub-consultant experts will be able to complete technical analysis and peer review applicants' supplied information, for example, cultural and structural reports, archaeological survey, cost analysis, and outreach materials. Next slide, please. So in sum, the city is required to review this application and complete the environmental review. The action tonight, again, to emphasize, is not a decision on the permit application. It's simply a contract for consultant services. And the council can either approve the contract, assuring a rigorous environmental analysis and a robust public involvement process, or city staff will complete the EIS without ESA expert consultant assistance. So we really don't have the option not to do this work. Next slide, please. And here's a motion for your consideration, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Nutting.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one short comment, and that is that as much as I am a champion of city staff, I don't believe we have the capacity at the current juncture to do the EIS ourselves. This makes much more sense to approve this. So with that, I'm going to make a motion. I move to approve the agreement with the Environmental Science Associates for the purpose of preparing an environmental impact statement for a proposal by Zenith Properties LLC as required by the State Environmental Policy Act, and authorize the city manager to sign the contract substantially in the form as submitted.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Buxton. With that, I'll open it up to discussion, and I'll start with Deputy Mayor Buxton.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Susan, and everyone who participated in preparing that report. That was, again, it covered a lot of bases. You did address public engagement and the robust public engagement that would be available if we contract here. Could you expand on that just a little bit for the sake of the public watching? How will the consultant help us increase and amplify our public engagement and scoping?
Of course, I'd be happy to. The consultant will prepare a public involvement plan. So they have a lot of experience in public engagement. So we will work with them to complete a plan. They also have a proprietary software that they use, which will enable people to submit comments, and then they will compile. If we anticipate a lot of interest, we know people are interested in this proposal. And so the volume of comments we anticipate is a lot. So the ability of this consultant to help us to categorize and make sure we don't miss anything, and incorporate all those public comments into the scoping process and the rest of the EIS is really important. They'll also do some public materials, help us with the website, all, you know, kind of the noticing, all that public facing material, so that we can get adequate information out to people so they can effectively participate.
Thank you so much. I have a couple more comments, but I'll let my colleagues go first. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Moving on to Councilmember Harris, if you could do so many questions, and if you have more, we'll come back to you, okay?
Fair enough. Thank you, Susan. Is there a formal document that describes why the EIS was determined to be necessary that we could look at?
At this point, we're getting the consultant assistance on board to help us with the issuance of the determination of significance. So we want them on board right from the beginning. So there will be a formal document that is issued, but that has not been done at this time.
So Susan, if I may add to that, there's essentially two options. One is a determination of non-significance that has a lower requirement of environmental review, I would say, if that's accurate. Or a stronger statement is a determination of significance, which requires the environmental impact statement that we've been discussing in this issue. So the city has taken the position of determination of significance, which establishes, I don't know if the word's a higher threshold, but higher requirements of addressing mitigation issues.
Yeah, no, I just wondered if there was like a formal letter that one has to issue with a DS at this point. Okay, so does ESA, they choose the subs, correct? Or does the city?
Well, the proposal that the Environmental Science Associates gave us has identified the subs that they have, and you know, we would have the opportunity to request that they choose a different one, but so far the subs that they have chosen have been of high quality, and so we haven't had any issue with that.
No, I'm just trying to understand who developed the budget. Is that the city that does that at this point, or is it ESA?
Well, yeah,
on 72.
Okay, it's kind of a cooperative process. So ESA gives us what they believe to be the appropriate level of effort, and we review that information, give them comments, and kind of go back and forth. The applicant certainly had some comments to make, but of course, you know, we have the final say over the contract and the scope and budget.
Okay, I'll yield for now. I hope to come back for a second round. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Harris. Moving on to Councilmember Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Susan, can you give us some idea of how broadly defined the word environment is in an environmental review?
Well, the state issues what's a document called an environmental checklist, and it sets forth all the elements of the environment. However, in this case, this is generally going to be more of a limited scope environmental impact statement, because we had done some preliminary work, and knowing that the proposal at this point is only a demolition, we don't have another development proposal. What we think will be the major scope of this is related to cultural resources impacts. Having said that, however, during the scoping process, that could certainly expand. I mean, we are going to listen to the comments and the agencies that we receive, and if the scope needs to be expanded, if issues arise that need to be addressed, then they will be incorporated in the scope of the EIS.
So things like the cultural impact, the architectural impact, the historical significance of the building all get taken into consideration under this kind of review?
Yes, the primary things that we've identified, of course, is the impact to cultural resources, but there, of course, are other impacts of a proposal, and we will take a look at them, whether or not they are, I guess, analyzed as an element of the EIS is yet to be determined based on the comments and the review that we do during the scoping process.
Okay. And then secondly, just help me understand the history a little bit. My memory was that the Masons had originally applied for the demolition permit, and that carried through with the sale of the property, ultimately to Zenith Properties. Is that correct, or is this a new permit that they are asking for?
The Masons did originally apply for the demolition permit. I understand that that was part of the sale of the property. The new owner did need to transfer that application into their own name. It doesn't necessarily transfer automatically, but they did transfer it into their name. So it's now an application by Zenith Properties.
That application is, the transfer of names is just an administrative piece. It's not, it didn't require somebody to approve a new permit. Is that correct?
No, it's just an application at this point. I mean, anybody can make an application for a demolition permit if they have the rights to the property. So yes, it is pretty much an administrative thing to change the name on the application into Zenith Properties.
Okay, is that all you had, Councilmember Steinmetz?
That's all I had. That's great.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Oxiger, did you have any questions before I start the second round? Okay, I'm going to move back to Deputy Mayor Buxton.
Thank you, Mayor. So Susan, could you clarify, you did mention that this EIS was going to be scoped purely around the demolition process. So is there any considerations for the future that might be involved in some of the scoping for this EIS? Like, is anything in the future attached to this at all?
So oh, sorry. I don't think that's a question I can answer yet, because we haven't even proceeded to issuance of the determination of significance at this point. And once we get into scoping, we will start to analyze what should be the alternatives. We will listen to the public's comments on that topic, and from that, we'll develop the scope. So it's a little early in the process to say kind of what will be incorporated into the scope of the EIS.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I did want to, while we're considering this here tonight, I did want to, well, for one, say thank you. I did notice elements in this presentation that were very responsive to questions and comments that have come in throughout the week, because we do release this packet late last week, and there's been a lot of communication. So I appreciate the attention to that detail. And personally, I do try and respond to almost everybody who writes to me. I just feel like it's the giving dignity to our community, to make sure that they're acknowledged for their community input when they write to me. But I have to admit that I have not responded in hardly any detail at all because of the type of issue this is. So For clarity about my responses and the ongoing process here, I just wanted to emphasize a couple of things. So in reading some of the information that was published by the Washington Historic Trust, they said that this step that we're taking tonight is in compliance with the state EPA, and they encouraged its full execution. So I appreciated that statement from them. And so as we move forward, in order to preserve our position as non-biased in any future quasi-judicial hearing as a council member, any conversation, whether it's in person or in writing or text, will in the future need to be disclosed if this is discussed. And that has the potential of eliminating any one of us from our primary duty in this process, and that is to make an educated, non-biased decision in the future. That's our role in this body of work. So I just want to ask if you to please understand that if I am publicly castigated for my silence, I will not defend myself. I will remain silent in order to preserve the integrity of this process and to protect the city that belongs to all of us. So thank you for your understanding ahead of time. And thank you, Mayor. That's all I have.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to move back over to Councilmember Harris for a second round.
Thank you, Mayor. Susan, could you, I was struck by the fact that there seem to be two different firms involved in architecture. Could you kind of describe what each of them are going to be doing? There's like a Northwest Vernacular and a Painter Preservation. I haven't run across that before in my work.
I'd have to look and see, into the scope, but we do have separate companies that would, or they may be part of the same, but there are different specialties. One looks at the structure from a historic perspective, and the other looks at archaeology. So we'll be looking at both the structure and the potential for archaeological resources underground. So those are different specialties and would normally have different firms that would review that.
Okay, thank you. So when it comes to outreach, I believe I read that there's going to be one public meeting. Is that sort of a guarantee, or is it limited to comments, the website?
No, we will have a public meeting. The consultant will also help us produce a public involvement plan. So there could be other things that would be included in there. We'll definitely have a website, we'll have materials and a comment form, but there will also be a virtual public meeting is what we're anticipating at this time.
Okay, and one last thing, because I haven't done this before, what would be an example of a mitigation on a historically significant building? I'm just, in other words, I can understand environmental mitigation in terms of, in other contexts, chemicals and so on, but can you give me a working example of what that might entail?
Well, I can't really speak to what might come out of the EIS process. It's way, way too early to do that. But some examples that other projects have done in other areas of the Puget Sound, they may save parts of a structure, or they may have a display about the history. There are a lot of different things that could happen, assuming that the building is demolished. Some of them are not. So it's just way too early in the process to know either what the result of the EIS will be or what the result of the permit decision will be at this point.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Harris. Moving on to Councilmember Nutting.
Thank you, Mayor. My only comments is being in this line of construction this is not an out of line ask. Cities ask for it. Most of the time have to front the bill themselves. we are lucky enough that the consultant's going to work for us and the client is going to be paying for the services. It's going to protect us as a city. And this is, it's the first part of figuring out what is going to happen with the site. And it's a long process, and there's going to be a lot of time for comments. I can't imagine that an environmental impact study is going to be done within 9 months, maybe 12. So there's a lot of time here, and this is only going to help us as a city and allow people to make comments further. So and the city's not going to foot the bill for it. So I have no reservation for approving this and being the first to pass the motion. So thank you, staff, for a great presentation. Thank you, Susan, and let's move this forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Nutting. I would add that I was also going to read the quote from the Washington Historic Trust. They do support this. We have to do this process. I want the residents of this city know this is a requirement. And particularly selecting this consultant gives the best information possible to be generated from it. And it opens up the best possibilities for the public to be engaged. That's what's important. That's what you ask for, and you're going to get that. I will caution our council members that, as Deputy Mayor Buxton said so well, we must be really careful about how we navigate at this point. So with that, I am going to call for the vote on the motion. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Councilmember Steinmetz, Councilmember Oxiger, Deputy Mayor Buxton, Councilmember Harris, Councilmember Nutting, and myself makes it a 6-0. Thank you. All right. Moving on to the next piece of business, the council vacancy process. So what I'd like to do is I've been working, I've talked to a few council members and city staff and so forth about outlining the process. And of course, I had experienced myself and have viewed some others. So what I'd like to do is basically outline the process, and then we'll bring it into discussion for a couple rounds. We'll solidify it. And I think we'll have essentially the process. One thing I want to say is no matter which way we do this, somebody will find fault in it. We have some limitations. We have Zoom. We don't have any ways to sequester anybody, hold them aside, answer individual questions and so forth. And the biggest thing we need to do in this process is make it fair and equal. So with that being said, I'll kind of go over the timeline and then include in some of the process that I have outlined for discussion. So the first thing is I just want to remind people that on February 11th, that's tomorrow, at 4:30 is the deadline for any applicants to submit their application. On February 18th, both council and the public, when it is notified to the public on the agenda, that is when we will know all of the candidates that have made an application. On the February 4th meeting, I will reiterate, this is basically the process. I will reiterate what we discussed and decide on tonight. And the candidates will have, I varied it between and open for discussion between 5 and 7 minutes to answer 3 questions. Those 3 questions will be, what qualifications and experience do you have that have prepared you to be a council member for the city of Des Moines? What do you hope to accomplish if appointed? And what is your vision for Des Moines? And that would be in an oral presentation to the council. I am recommending we do no questions. Again, I want to reiterate, meetings are in Zoom and we've never had this before, and we need to keep an equal and fair process. There is no way that we can possibly sequester candidates so that we can ask them individually the questions, and others we cannot guarantee that they would not hear it on, say, channel 21 or something else. And then we would end that meeting the meeting would be adjourned after their statements. From February 24th through March 3rd, public would be allowed to comment through the website as they do today, or reach out to various council members and so forth. And council members and applicants would be encouraged to have conversations with each other to get specific questions answered. On March 3rd, all correspondence, that meaning those that email in or use our website to give their public comment, would be read into the record, and there would be made time for the public to comment on their recommendations for the choice of city council. Once that's done, council members would be afforded the opportunity to make comments about candidates, why they favor one over the other, and so forth, and to specific reasons. Then, as mayor, I would call a vote. If we have a tie, we would then move into an executive session to discuss it. At the end of that executive session, we would reconvene and I would take another vote. If there's no majority, a discussion would be as how we were going to address it past the March 10th meeting. I don't feel it's necessary to discuss it past the March 3rd vote at this point. If we do, that would be a decision we would take as a plan B. With that being said, I'm going to open the floor to discussion. So Councilmember Harris, I'll let you go first. We're going to do two rounds before we agree.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, so my two objections to the 2020 process were, there was a strong admonishment, like to ask the same question. And I was like, man, I'm trying to be courteous here, but yeah, that was not great. We should each be able to ask our whatever we want based on, what we are concerned about in the applications. I would like to investigate with IT an option to interview applicants one at a time, because it was just deeply frustrating watching people go down the line and just parrot one another's responses. No offense, Councilmember Steinmetz, but I believe you kind of met, it became something of a joke by the end of the process. And so that's basically it. We should be able to ask whatever we want, and we should make every effort to provide a way to interview each individually, if there's any human possibility. That's it.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Steinmetz.
And as one who was involved in that 2020 process, I can tell you it was extremely frustrating from the applicant standpoint, in part for what Mr. Harris was saying. The first person asked the question was struggling to try to come up with the answer very quickly. Not everybody's quick on their feet, nor is that a requirement of this job. But by the time you got to the last person, it was pretty much, yeah, I agree with what everybody else said. Because everybody heard the same question over and over. And frankly, most people had similar answers. But the other side of that coin is that particularly those council members that chose to ask individualized questions seem to be asking them with a little zinger against the candidates that they disfavored and for the candidates that they favored. There's always the ability to ask those kinds of questions to elicit information that's going to reflect badly or reflect positively on those candidates. And I think that was unfortunate for the applicants as well, because nobody was prepared to try to deal with that kind of that kind of a response. I think that asking the applicants to make a 5-minute statement around those three things, and then they have the opportunity to sit down and talk with any council member that they want, makes a lot of sense. If you have those questions that you really need to press somebody on, that's your opportunity to do that. If that applicant chooses not to sit down with you, well, that tells you something right there about whether or not you might want to vote for that candidate or not. I think the candidates hopefully will make themselves available to everybody, and I hope the council will make themselves available to all of the candidates. And that's how you get to that sense of fairness of the process. And then, lastly is that I think getting the input from the citizens of Des Moines about what is important. How do we set that criteria? What is it that they want to hear? And what is it that they want to see? Not necessarily about an individual candidate at this point, but what the citizens think is important for them as a decision-making criteria is really the information that everybody on the council needs right now. Last Saturday I was down at the quarterdeck, and I had some good conversation with people. And even though some of them had somebody in mind, we were able to get the conversation towards why is that? What is it that you think is important? And that's what I want to know. And I'm going to be down at the quarterdeck again. I'll be there from noon to 2 on Saturday if anybody wants to come talk to me about it, because I think this is really important. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Steinmetz. I'm going to move on to Deputy Mayor Buxton.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate the input of my colleagues so far. And I appreciate your effort, Councilmember Steinmetz. You've set aside the time and invited the public. And then I interviewed you. but see, that's our option. Also, there are, with this plan, I appreciate this plan that the mayor's given to us. So because it gives us a lot of options and it gives the public options. So this is what I mean by this. The applicants are going to have an opportunity to include whatever they wish in their public application. They have 3 main questions, but they can attach any additional information that they want, which can include any information that they have gathered from the public that they're a part of. They have a wide opportunity, and already have had an opportunity to interview any of their cohorts in the public that they have wanted to, and they still have a little bit of time to do that before they complete their application. If we want, as council members, let's say, well, we would love the opportunity to ask these questions in public and have these candidates respond in public so that the public can hear them answer. Well, we're going to have the opportunity to sit and say, I interviewed this candidate and asked them this question, and this is what they said. See, we're going to have the opportunity to report back our experience of interviewing these candidates if we invest in them. So that's our opportunity to do. Candidates will have the opportunity to interact with the public, vice versa. I already said that, or vice versa. The public has, okay, here's what I wanted to say about that. If the public wants to give us input, they will have the opportunity to interview any candidate or call any candidate and gather information and then write to us. They can do the exact same thing. I talked with John Doe, Councilmember Buxton, or Deputy Mayor. Sorry about that. Speaking to myself. I talked with John Doe and asked him this question, and this is what they said, and I don't appreciate it. Could you please support another candidate? I mean, this is what the public can do. And if a candidate doesn't make themselves available to the public in that way, that will send a message as well. So this system that the mayor's come up with gives that opportunity, lots of opportunity for public engagement after the public has read their applications. You see the value of this? If we do it the other way, the public doesn't get as much opportunity to ask the questions and then give us input. So what is important to the citizens? Well, I do appreciate the question, Councilmember Steinmetz, but we did just have an election as well. And I'm hoping that all interested parties were very involved in the questions and answers during that time. So, and here again, we are going to have an opportunity to interact with any applicant as we wish, and they with us. So I really like this process. Thank you so much, Mayor.
All right. Thank you. City Attorney George, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to clarify some language. So for the state law, as far as the appointment process, the formal interviews, that's what's going to occur in public. Those have to be in an open public meeting. So that's February 24th. I just don't want, there was some reference to council members interviewing outside of a public meeting. So those aren't interviews. That's not the interview process. If the council member wants to have a discussion with an applicant outside of a meeting, I just want to make clear that that's not part of the interview process.
Correct. Thank you for clarifying. Councilmember Nutting, before I go back to Councilmember Harris, you had your hand up for a second.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I am the only council member on the council that has been appointed and run several successful campaigns. My appointment process was done in one night. There was 8 applicants and I was one of 8, and I was appointed the night of the process. Mayor, I have to applaud you for coming up with the way to navigate through this process during nothing but Zoom meetings and virtual meetings. So I'm all aboard with this and keeping it to the few questions, and I was asked the same question that the other people in front of me were asked. So that's the way it's been. That's the way it should be, and I think we should move forward with this.
Thank you, Councilmember Nutting. Before I move on, Councilmember Oxiger, did you have anything you wanted to make a statement before I go for the second round?
Not at this time.
None? Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Harris, really quick. That's what the city clerk and myself did, is research it with IT. It was determined that it just wasn't possible to run effectively. So I'd already looked into that as a possibility. That's why I pretty much had directed it this way. I just wanted you to know that. I'm going to add that this process, by not doing it in one night and doing it in 2 different meetings, gives the maximum allowable input from the public. And it also sets a stage for each of us to have those individual conversations with the candidates and ask the questions and make our own determinations before we come to vote. So that's where understanding the limitations and so forth, I'll be candid. We had essentially all agreed to ask the same questions, and you didn't during the last process, and it actually made it uneven and unfair, in my opinion. And this is where one of my major considerations in making it fair and equal for everybody with the same opportunity. So that's kind of the color I had behind it. So with that, I'm going to yield the floor back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. So, I'm thinking of that movie, Annie Hall. I would love to provide each of you a link to the video of the 2013 process, and which I frankly thought was pretty darn swell, where Councilmember Nutting was appointed. And some council members asked the same questions. There was a big thing about property rights for some reason, but others did not. And it turned out to be fine. And there were several rounds of questions, and look at the video for yourselves. I do want the applicants to be able to respond and maybe think on their feet a little bit. I don't think that's too much to ask. We're giving them, the successful applicant is getting quite something, because it's, not to put too fine a point on it, but people who are appointed tend to get reelected. And so this is something. And I want the public to see who they're getting. It's one thing to say, oh yes, well, I spoke with this person and that person, but I want the public to have a sense of who they are beyond that written application. And so I would move to just, make sure that each of us have the ability to ask their choice of questions. Yeah.
Does anyone have any other statements? Okay, with that said, we can, I'd like to take a vote on as I stated it with not having questions. I'd like to see if everybody, the outline I gave is the one we'll go with as the agreed process. Please raise your right hand and I'll identify you. I see Councilmember Steinmetz, Councilmember Oxiger, Councilmember Buxton, Councilmember Nutting, and myself. Those opposed? Councilmember Harris. With that, we will stick with the processes outlined on, the vote was 5-1 on February 24th. And then move it in, and then the second meeting and the vote will take place on March 3rd, Thursday. That's correct date, right? For the okay. With that being said, we will move on to introduction of future consideration, items of future consideration. I want to remind everybody, as we move there, this is time for the sole purpose of proposing new business items that have not previously been before council for discussion or on a future agenda. This is not a time for questions about our old business. Council members can submit questions or seek updates previously discussed with the city manager at any time. Do any council members have new businesses they would like to propose? Seeing none, we'll move on to board and committee reports. And with that, I yield the floor to Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. A quick reminder, the Port of Seattle is they have this annual ACE grant program where they will offer the public a free tree. And you should be getting some kind of notice either on the community page, the city mailer. Please take advantage of it. We need more trees. I attended a WIRA meeting today, which basically has a lot to do with salmon recovery on the Environment Committee. It is astounding how much money the county and the state put into helping our little salmon friends. And it is no small factor in the marina and in McSorley Creek and in everything we do. Real quick, in my opinion, the Masonic home is Des Moines. We all just live here. It is possible to have historic preservation here, but it is up to the public. It's not up to the city. It's a wonderful thing to see, many letters from the public and likes on Facebook, but the few times that the city has preserved great buildings like the Covenant Beach Parks and the Field House, it really came down to somebody having a passion for it. It's not easy. It's millions of dollars. Okay, you got to want it, but such things are possible. If you look at Ms. Maxwell in SeaTac, nobody told her that you cannot save a large forested area owned by the Port of Seattle. And so she just went and organized a community group and did it. So you have to have that kind of commitment. And I guess you have to not know how daunting the task is. So go out and get them. And that's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Harris. Moving on to Councilmember Oxiger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a task force report out that was issued recently by the State Recreation and Conservation Office that I would commend to council and staff. The task force studied the importance of physical activity for the health of our youngest citizens and the opportunity to build community by providing space for citizens groups to congregate, recreate, and celebrate. Physical activity is a proven way to improve youth mental health and is linked to better educational outcomes. The availability of meeting space is a way to promote citizen involvement. The Physical Activity Task Force report offers 6 recommendations, including establishing partnerships with local school districts to designate schools as community hubs and civic centers. Such a partnership could be one way that our city can increase its inventory of ball fields and recreation centers without the issues involved in acquiring new properties. Let's face it, there is not a lot of open space left in Des Moines for such purposes, and obtaining them will be extremely expensive. Shared use means our inventory of taxpayer-funded school facilities could be maximized during non-school hours to provide greater access for physical activities and community involvement. We have had since 2013 an interlocal agreement with the Highline School District permitting the use of existing facilities by our Parks and Recreation Department to operate before and after school programs such as Club Chaos and sports activities, including youth soccer and basketball. We could have more significant impact if we adapt a system similar to the Tacoma School District and Tacoma Metro Parks arrangement. They work hand in glove to provide activities for school kids and the community at large. Citizens would also have access to community meeting places, educational opportunities, and venues for events. Shared use is an efficient use of public resources and will help build community. Now, there are going to be naysayers who will cite liability concerns. Some will note the costs. But the Physical Activity Task Force is asking the legislature to enhance shared use policies, ease liability concerns, and offer financial incentives for anybody that participates in such a program. So I ask that we pay particular attention to this report and seriously consider it if it is a way to expand park recreation and community service and to enhance public's participation. And I'll make that available to the council members. I believe Mahoney, I've sent you a copy.
Councilmember Oxenberg, if you would submit that to our city clerk for distribution.
Okay.
That would be the correct way to do that.
Thank you.
Moving on to Councilmember Nutting. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. I missed Mr. Councilmember Steinmetz. My bad. My apologies, sir.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. You know, I kind of want to echo the sentiment that Mr. Ossinger just talked about. You know, having coached recreational league, both baseball and basketball, and then over in the what used to be the American League, Little League, down in Federal Way, I can tell you nothing is better than getting your kids out to get that kind of exercise. So thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. And I certainly hope that we can renew the partnerships that we had with a lot of the local schools to provide the facilities for basketball, baseball, and soccer activities, because that was a great part of raising kids here in Des Moines. The second thing I do want to echo a little bit of what Councilmember Harris said is regarding the Masonic, it is a question of the public response. It's not something the council will do its duty, but it's up to the public to make it happen. And then thirdly is that, as I mentioned before, we're not having council meetings or committee meetings, so I really don't have anything to report on that, but we had some good conversations down at the quarter deck on Saturday. I'm going to be back there again. I'll be a little later in the day from noon to about 2. And hopefully Deputy Mayor Buxton won't be the only one interviewing me during that second hour. My first hour was great, though. I talked to several people and really enjoyed those conversations. So please come down and talk to me about it. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Councilmember Steinmetz. Moving on to Councilmember Nutting.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to comment on the facilities use. Although Highline has been a very great partnership, they require a lot of insurance backup, and with insurance companies not issuing the insurance policies to allow you to use their facilities, it creates a huge problem because Highline will not insure you to use their property as a outside entity. So that being said, I hate to throw Highline under the bus, which we've talked about. I kind of lost my thought on that. I yield it back to you, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Nutting. Deputy Mayor Buxton, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm pulling out my comments. So I noticed this week that we did not have a city manager's report, and I'm trying to rack my brain to think of when that has ever happened. Hardly ever, just want to say. And I came to the table, though, tonight to thank the staff and the city manager for the reports and the way that it happens. There have been a couple of comments, and I do hear on occasion questions in regard to it. So I just have about 3 or 4 observations about it. So the city manager for a while used to bring forward a series of bulleted slides, and each staff member would be responsible for their segment to come forward with slides and talk. And it was very rote. And there was a lot of staff time involved in preparing these reports. Now, the way it happens, there is a city manager report for every council meeting that we have. It's dynamic. It's an organic response to not only council member questions, the mayor's questions during the week, or the filtered community response and interest for the week. If I receive interesting information or questions throughout the week, I am commonly forwarding community interest and concerns to the staff and the city manager for their attention or clarity. And many times those questions and concerns have filtered up into the city manager's report for the week. And I know we don't always clarify that, but that is how it happens. And so you get this. So now what we get, instead of this rote bulleted slides, we get this dynamic presentation that's based on the heartbeat of the community and things that council members and questions that council members are facing out in the community. And another thing is that he uses it for as an opportunity to correct or enhance information that goes out into the public. And it's in the setting of an open public meeting that's protected through Robert's rules, our council rules, and mutual respect. So it's a perfect opportunity to bring clarity to information or things that are going out in the public. And one more thing, you know, the staff used to come up one by one, but this is a great opportunity to showcase the work of the staff if you'll notice, there are these great presentations, slide presentations that get prepared by one segment of the staff, like the police department or public works or the parks department, where all their work for a period of months can be showcased and all the community questions can be answered. And it produces this magnificent video clip then that can be linked and brought back out into the community whenever needed. So I want to give kudos to our city manager for the way that we have opted to bring forward the city manager's report. I really prefer this to the way it was done when I was first elected. And I hope and I think that the community appreciates it as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Buxton. I, a few nights ago, attended a community meeting up at the Trinity Lutheran Church. It was several people in the area and vicinity that were had their concerns about crime. Chief Thomas, Sergeant Cripe, Commander Richards, Tanya Seabury were amongst those that were there, and I think he's Sergeant Oak now, but it was great. They made themselves available at a late night, along with our 9/11 dispatch team. I think they're Valley, I can't remember the exact term, but it was informative, and several residents brought up concerns, a lot of education there. They weren't aware of some of the things, outside forces that made policing a little bit difficult and so forth. I want to thank Tad Doviak for hosting that meeting. It was a really great offer to avail themselves to the public to explain some of the things they were doing. And I thought the chief did a wonderful job of talking about his strategy, particularly on Pack Highway. I also, Michael, I'd like to commend your staff. I know how much work you put into these presentations tonight. They were excellent. They were informative. They were very comprehensive and detailed. You dotted I's and crossed T's in a large degree. And lastly, I want to thank the council for civility. What we did tonight is we have a process. Now, everybody's not going to think it's perfect, but it was in a council agreed process that we will follow. And I appreciate the cooperation. Everybody got their say. We came up with a decision and we'll execute to that. And with that, I seek a motion for adjourning this meeting. I see Councilmember Nutting with his hand raised.
So moved, Mayor.
Councilmember Steinmetz, I see you as a second. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. It's a unanimous 6-0 vote. The next meeting will be February 24th, and look forward